Hi, this is Amanda, and I'm here to tell you that you need to read a book. The book you need to read is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I'm recommending it because it's one of my favorite books, and it's a very significant novel in the history of literature. I probably read it yearly, sometimes even twice a year, depending. So who is Jane Austen and why do you need to read her book? She was a minister's daughter in the late 18th century. She is famous today for her 6 novels, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Persuasion, Northanger Abbey, Mansfield Park, and Emma. Emma, perhaps the most famous after Pride and Prejudice. She wrote most of her life. She authored her first work that we have record of, which is a history of England, written in a very childish style, I think when she was about 11 or 12. So there's a surviving manuscript of that, and it is amusing. But her novels are definitely well-known and well-regarded. She never married and died in her early 40s, having been relatively successful for an author, especially a female author of the time. Novels in the late 18th century were a rising medium. Their popularity had to do with the rise of the circulating library, where more and more people had access to printed books through relatively inexpensive monthly subscriptions. Most popular among readers at the time were the Gothic novels, some of which still survive and are read today, although they're not nearly as popular with modern readers. They tended to center around a helpless heroine who is noted for her virtue and is under extreme duress either through wicked uncles or kidnapping strangers or Italian bandits or something. So there are a large number of these Gothic novels circulating in the late 18th century. And Austen begins her writing, her serious adult writing career by writing a satire on the Gothic novel, and that's Northanger Abbey. It's the shortest of her 6 novels, and it's hilarious, especially if you understand the Gothic novel context, but even if you don't, her wit and charm will carry you through. You probably need to read The Castle of Otranto for the full appreciation of Northanger Abbey. Castle of Otranto is the novel that's being sent up in Northanger Abbey. But you can enjoy her humor, I think, regardless. So Northanger Abbey was not well received when she first published it, or when she first authored it. She sold it to a publisher who then didn't print it and distribute it. But I think it survived quite well. It came out after the success of Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility had established her as a financial success with publishers. Anyway, Pride and Prejudice. I think we all know the novel for its multiple film adaptations, if nothing else, and of course its first line is very famous. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. This sets the context for the novel, and it also sets the context for upper-class English marriage. Upper-class women in English society have no opportunities for self-sufficiency apart from either inheriting or marrying into a fortune. And of course, inheritance is complicated by the laws of primogeniture, which mean that most estates are entailed on the male line and not the female line. So not all estates, but most estates in English society at this time will descend to the nearest male heir. So if there's no oldest son, or, well, no son, or grandson, then it goes through a nephew or a cousin in the male line. So a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. The rest of that first page, I think, will further set the context. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. "But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. "You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." This was invitation enough. So that should give you a bit of a taste of Austen's prose, and hopefully whet your appetite for more. She is perhaps best known in our society as sort of a purveyor of sweetness and propriety in her cultural context. So, film adaptations seem more focused on proper costuming, those high-waisted gowns, lots of tea, and walking around and being very prim. And so there's a perception of her that she's a novelist of politeness, and a novelist of beautiful dresses, and a novelist of like archaic cultural customs. But I think it's pretty obvious, even from the first page of Pride and Prejudice, that she's far more a novelist of wit and insight and humor and personal and social commentary than she is one to spend any time describing elegant gowns or elegant teas. In fact, she's pretty well known among scholars as she never describes someone's physical appearance beyond saying that they are well-formed or well-made or appealing. And so when there's this image of her as the author who describes or sets the scene for prim and proper English society, I think that's missing out on the vast majority of what's going on in her novels. She is describing people's interactions, she's describing people's relationships, she's describing people's characters in incisive and clever ways. We can already tell Mr. Bennet is a bit henpecked, but passively resistant to that henpecking. We can tell that Mrs. Bennet is nervous and anxious, and it seems pretty clear, the single man in possession of a good fortune. She's nervous and anxious because she has daughters that need to get married in order to have any social standing. So the larger context of the novel, the estate that the Bennets live on is entailed on the nearest male relative. They have 5 daughters and no sons, and so Mr. and Mrs. Bennet are in the unfortunate situation of not being able to provide for their 5 girls and worrying about whether or not they'll be successfully married. So the novel goes on to describe the ensuing relationships of 3 of the 5 daughters, and they portray some significantly interesting paths to marriage. I won't spoil the story, although I only marginally believe that spoilers are actually a problem, especially with a novel that's hundreds of years old. But in the course of following these marriage plots, you're going to enjoy and appreciate a refined commentary on the complexity of the marital relationship, the importance of mutual respect, the importance of being the kind of person who can grow and change in a relationship, the pitfalls of being impetuous, the risks of judging other people's character poorly, the necessity of being submitted to correction from respected sources. That all sounds very serious, I think, but you're also going to be deeply amused by just how absurd Mrs. Bennet can be, and how absurd her anxieties and her commentary is. And then, of course, that doesn't even touch on the delight and absurdity of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who is interfering and meddlesome and hilarious, but she meets her match. And of course, the delight of a well-concluded love story. So you need to read a book, and you need to read Pride and Prejudice. Thank you.